Yes, yes.
Darsab, welcome, welcome. I didn't realize you joined. I just sent you.
He's joined us.
I think I saw his name in the Zoom.
Chat.
नहीं, सुधांशु जी हैं, कलिका जी आ गए हैं, श्याम जी से हैं, भास्कर राव साहब आप आ गए, वेरी गुड. आनंद जी हैं. I didn't see.
So Professor Dhar Chakrabarty's co-host has been accepted, I think. DP.
देखना तो.
I don't see him in the list.
Yes, I'm here.
Okay.
Oh, welcome, Darsab. There's something wrong. We didn't quite notice.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So, welcome to all. And Sushma ji, if you could kindly.
Okay. I'll go ahead. Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everyone, and a very warm welcome to this first virtual roundtable hosted by All India Disaster Mitigation Institute on Accountability First, 10 Reset Questions Shaping People-Led Humanitarian Action. Like I mentioned, I'm Sushma. I'm a junior professional associate at the World Bank based in Ethiopia, and it is a privilege to moderate today's conversation with such an accomplished group of leaders, practitioners from India's disaster risk and humanitarian ecosystem. Thank you for joining us today for this focused one-hour dialogue. We are gathered around a simple but urgent idea. Accountability must come first, not as a reporting requirement, but as a lived reality for the people who carry humanitarian response on their shoulders, frontline workers, community workers, local volunteers, and local organizations. Today, we are joined by three distinguished speakers, Mr. Rajiv Kumar Jha, Director of DRR and Climate Change Adaptation at Humanitarian Aid International. He brings over 18 years of experience across South Asia on disaster risk reduction, resilient livelihoods, and community-based resilience. Dr. P.G. Dhar Chakrabarty from Ramakrishna Mission Vivekanand Educational and Research Institute, Kolkata, is a respected academic and practitioner known for ethical, people-centered approaches to disaster management and institutional capacity. And Professor N. Vinod Chandra Menon, founder member of Disaster Management Authority, Government of India, has played a defining role in shaping India's disaster risk reduction architecture and resilience thinking. We'll close this session with reflections on and the way ahead from Mr. Mihir Bhatt, who leads the All India Disaster Mitigation Institute. Today's session is anchored in 10 reset questions, as you might have already read them. Questions that move accountability from being a concept to becoming a system of protection, dignity, and justice. These aren't just abstract questions, I believe. They are operational questions, and in India's context, they connect directly to how we think about disaster management systems, right-based approaches, and everyday realities of community responders. Our intention in this session is to not solve all the 10 questions in 1 hour, but maybe it is to see what's working and what's failing, to identify what are the practical shifts required in policy, operations, and financing that could move us forward, and maybe leave with a clearer sense of what needs to change to make accountability real for humanitarian and community workers. A quick note on how we will run this session. We will have 3 short reflections from our speakers, followed by an interactive discussion and a question and answer round, then concluding remarks from Mr. Mihir Bhatt. I would encourage everyone to keep their remarks practical, grounded, and timely. I should also keep reminding everyone of for the time. I also suggest participants to write the questions in the chat box for easier transition. We will also share AIDMI's work on humanitarian action on the chat box. So please have a look at it. With that, thank you once again for being here and for the work you do. I will now invite our first speaker, Mr. Rajiv Kumar Jha, to set the context with focus on humanitarian and community workers. Sir.
Yeah, thank you. Let me share my screen with I think is it
Yes, we can see your screen, sir.
But it is, yeah. Let me, yes. Yes. So thank you very much for giving me an opportunity and giving me honor to have my reflections along with such a illustrious people. I mean, why wish to sit somewhere along with them long time. So thank you very much, Mihir sir. Thank you very much, Dhar Chakravarti sir and Vinod sir. I also look forward for your reflections and interactions. So what I'm going to share is the story or the actions which led us to do certain things into our sector, which we always very passionately feel about, and I wanted to work and we're working with. This is a story of humanitarian workers, frontline humanitarian workers, how they've gone through, what their requirements are. So just for example, if you just go by the long history of our humanitarian appeal in India, in Indian context, probably the first evidence you will find in the Sagora bronze plate in somewhere in Uttar Pradesh long ago. It talks about official orders of famine relief. In UP, you will still find that. And probably in modern era, Rockadic 2, where Ashoka Edict, everybody knows, has talks about everywhere in dominations, medical treatment of the people and animals has given. And then the famine code 1882 was the first famine code given by the British India. So we had a long history of in humanitarian relief, not only just in modern days, but it seems very early days. But despite working on that, probably we forgot to taking care of the people, those who actually work with, not only about the organizations and the managers, but the people who connect, who hold the last packet of, of goods or a and that take to the home to the people who are probably forgotten. And because I'm working with Humanitarian International, and we have these 3-4 different recent examples we have gone through, and we realized that why the work was needed. All this idea was in my mind, definitely, but probably even I also have not thought the way started thinking in recent years. And everybody knows that first very stark example was the COVID. Uh, it was the story that unfolded, exposed our humanitarian sector, where the you have to venture out to the community at your risk, and nobody was there to taking care of yours, because you may venture out to help people and you're coming back to your home in the evening, you are not sure you are going to live your day next day. And that exposes the vulnerability of the humanitarian workers, not the people who are getting affected, but those who are going to serve them. And for the one data, and there's no aggregated data exactly how many people we have lost, but in overall aggregated data in India, we have lost more than 300, health and care workers, and more than 383 nurses and ASA workers. And if you see the overall data, it is more than 11,000 something uh, people have lost their lives. That was the thing really shook us, everybody, and shook us personally, that the frontline workers, humanitarian agencies, those who are people, those who have low paid workers, those working without a contracts, those who are actually connecting with you, the people, their homes, delivering the goods, were exposed, and they themselves are not sure that whether they will survive or not. So that was the story we wanted to that shook us probably first time to take this issue as a larger cause. Second was probably incident. I will tell you the our own experience while working with the humanitarian response in Central India, especially with the corporate donors. A lot of corporate donors were ready to provide relief goods, but they were not ready to provide support for their institutional cost, overheads, insurance. That means, again, those who are frontline workers will be exposed. They will be working without the adequate safeguards. And the third was the recent conflict in the Manipur. There was nobody out there, no corporate, no government. There was eerie silence. Probably the Humanitarian Aid International, or maybe few were there who actually went out of the way against the government uh, apathy. To work against the system, to wanted to help the people. And the whole people who has no roles in the conflict, they were innocent victim of those conflict. And we saw the first hand. I saw the first hand that how situation was dire and nobody was helped. And those who are helping at their risk against the system and the political system, the governance system, and all that. So that leads to our certain ways to what to do. So what we did was that we launched one study. It's called the status of humanitarian workers uh, in Asia Pacific per se. And we launched the study into probably around to 15 to 20 countries with the help of international experts. More than 754 first-hand surveys interview were conducted. And that includes the INGOs, NNGOs, expatriate staff, national staff, women, men, and all that. And we come out with a starting report, which says that there is a strong need to protect the lives of the humanitarian workers, those who are actually delivering into the ground. And if you see the examples of Gaza and the Ukraine, you will see how many people have been lost their life while delivering the humanitarian needs to the people, to the actually surviving families. That is another story, because if you include that data, then it's a huge number. So I'm not going into that. And one of the recommendation of the study was the Bill of Rights for those humanitarian and community workers, those who are working across the globe. So whether you are an INGO, whether you are a national NGO, whether you are a community-based NGO, who you are, where you are working, people who are working into the humanitarian sector must have the common rights, and the rights must be given to them by their organizations, and by the respective government must adhere those rights. And what are those rights? The thing is that we have 10 reset questions now. Basically, it covers all that 10 reset questions. What are those rights? So we wanted to constitute that what are those rights. And for the own experiences, we come out with our own document. It's called the Charter of Rights for those humanitarian and community workers that can be applied to all over across the region, whoever you are, whether you are a manager, whether you are a community workers, whether you are a CEO. If you are going into the field, these rights should be, you should have it. Whether you have right now you have it or not, that's another way. But we are focusing on those rights, those things, and which we say is the right to life and liberty, right for just compensation, grievance mechanism, protection and accountability, mental health, and right to local leadership. This right, local leadership, we also wanted to add the agenda of localization in terms of respecting the local culture, local procurement, local industry, and all that. So if you go back to our Charter of Rights, recently we have launched in the Regional Humanitarian Partnership Week at Bangkok. And it was one of the probably strongest document, probably most relevant document is ever coming out from the Global South NGO like Humanitarian International. A lot of INGOs and NGOs are working in India and South Asia. But they never ever thought of to bring those kind of rights which can be most relevant to the people around, they can be looked after, because probably they missed their bus in a way. So we came out with this 6 core right. It's called the Charter of Rights for the humanitarian and community workers, which is right to life and safety, because we strongly felt that the basic PPE kit at the time of COVID were not available to our community workers. If you remember, India was totally importing the PPE kits. It's later on we started working on it and it become the global producer and exporting it. But the fact is that we didn't have the basic PPE kits for those community workers. We didn't have the proper, masks to protect ourselves. So those kind of things really shook us. And we feel that there is a strong need for Charter of Rights for those people who are working in those areas and come out. So we talked on the 6 core rights. One right we also advocated, but not in here. It is a right of digital and privacy, which we have. You can see into that original document. And if you see that our launch at the Regional Humanitarian Summit, it was supported by CHS Alliance, Humanitarian Advisory, Coast Foundation, Humanitarian International, and Protect Humanitarian. Protect Humanitarian, if you see that, it's a guy, Olivier, he was the one who was kidnapped and jailed in Iran while working with the probably organization called the mm, uh, Relief International or Rescue International in Iran, and probably he was the one who probably exchanged by the government of Iran with the West or by the 6 prisoners, and he came out, and he established the Protect Humanitarians. The moment he saw these kind of things, he jumped on and wanted to support our Charter of Rights, and he was one of the panel speaker into our uh, into our launch in recently RSPW event. Right now, if you see that endorsement of it, more than 92 organizations from across the 18 countries have endorsed the Charter of Rights, which basically covers with our the 10 reset questions. I'm not going to detail out what are the 10 reset questions and what we need to do on those 10 reset questions. What are the solutions of that? Because that we'll start working out. It'll be quite a long answer. And Meher sir knows all the answers. He need not to ask the questions, that 10 reset questions. But we wanted to the relevance of the study, wanted to cover those relevance of the study, which has been endorsed strongly, and most of this support we came from South Sudan, came from DRC, came from Uganda, Bangladesh, Pakistan, Kenya, Burundi, Malawi, Sierra Leone, Nepal. So you can see the relevance of these Charter of Rights, and these are the countries who are facing actually the conflict on daily basis. And now, just for brief example, I will go by 1 to 3 couple of research questions. Just for your benefits, I just took only 3 and rest leaving 7 for others. That is how systems should ensure, what India guarantee fair, and what humanitarian guarantee mechanism. It should be, we should have the safe and retaliation-free grievance SOP. We should have the whistleblower protocol. We should have the learning indicators. We should have the anti-retaliation safeguards. I mean, national health, social security issues, annual audits, we can have it. So if all this can be part of the humanitarian system, probably we are going to answer some of the things within the humanitarian framework. One glaring issue we have right now is that we have the disaster management policy and act also, and recently amended, quite rightfully so. And it has brought a lot of good things into, especially in terms of data and mechanism, and giving more rights to the NDMA in terms of developing the policies and bringing the new human resources. But one comprehensive policy we do not have is that the national level humanitarian disaster and relief policy. Every state has their own relief standards, relief codes. So based on that, they provide the compensation. But we missed out the overall comprehensiveness of this nature, and nowadays is more relevant because of the transboundary nature of environmental crisis, which is gripping everybody. So on that basis, I'm going to have this my own question to the panel speakers, like on leadership and power, like who holds the real decision-making power in India, and one is on humanitarian workers' voice, like who holds the voice, and what should be the community participation, and what should be the pathways to my next speakers. Based on those things, I conclude my remarks for that for the next panel of discussions, and hoping this next 45 minutes or 50 minutes will be more engaging and fascinating discussions to follow on. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir. Before we move forward, just a kind request to our speakers to keep the talking points light, and so that we can have more in-depth conversation during our discussion round and Q&A, and so we can also timely finish this session. Moving forward, Mr. PG Dhar Chakraborty. So if you could share your screen. I shall also keep reminding our speakers of the time.
Is it visible?
No, sir.
Can you see this?
Yes, we can see your screen.
Actually, I would be looking at this humanitarian reset differently, because reset means that we are fundamentally looking at what are the fundamental changes are required. So, and this humanitarian system, basically we need to define the scope, because sometimes we are broadening the scope to include many things, and sometimes we are narrowing down to only to the disasters. So in Indian particular context, humanitarian actions are, we're narrowly focusing only to disasters, but we are excluding other humanitarian situations like conflicts or riots, or for which there is no system at all. Our entire humanitarian efforts are focused mostly on disasters. So I think we should look into define the scope so that it includes all sorts of humanitarian crisis situations, and where saving and protecting lives are important, protecting lives with dignity. So the reset questions, if you look at it globally, I think there have been, 5 different, fundamental resets over the over last 100 years or so. Basically starting with this setting up the International Federation of the Red Cross in 1919, based on the principles of neutrality, impartiality, or independence. And then in 1929, when this IFRC was broadened to include the Islamic world, IFRC and the Red Cross and the Red Crescent, that was another reset. And in 1946, when the United Nations Charter came, humanity was added as a principle. That was another fundamental reset. And in 1991, when the UN General Assembly, they they accepted the principles, they created the this emergency, response coordinator system, then international agency for this, and then the CHAs, this uh, the core humanitarian standards, and the UN Office for Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs came. And that was a turning point, because from 1991 we find that there have been extension of humanitarian activities globally and nationally in various places all around the world. So now in 2025 we find another reset area, because we find that although the crises are many, but the humanitarian spaces are getting shrunk, because the international and national assistance for humanitarian work is getting reduced, and there is a huge gap in that. So in order to address this, these altered situations, so the emergency relief coordinator, he has come out with a reset plan. It's a 10-point plan, which looks into how the environment, the humanitarian system globally has to address the current challenges, where we do not have much resources, but we have humanitarian crisis, and how we can address this by focusing more on the local level, so that the intermediaries are reduced, so that local resources and local leadership can play a much important role in addressing this crisis. So I'm not going into the larger reset questions which are now being discussed globally. I'll rather focus it on the reset in the Indian context. So the humanitarian resets in India, we find that fundamentally there have been 3 different resets in Indian context. One, although the humanitarianism has been present, as previous speaker has pointed out, that from the beginning, because there are certain fundamental humanitarian philosophy in India which has been practiced. But basically, as a system, it emerged during the British the colonial rule, when we have faced the famines, and we had the famine code. And the famine provided that provided a kind of a minimal standards. They set up that the relief works for the able-bodied and the gratuitous relief for the others to save lives. That was the focus. And we find that after independence, we basically followed this, famine code with a different kind of a nomenclature. Initially as a scarcity manual, then as a relief manual, and then subsequently we find that initially it was focused entirely on the drought, and then we extended our relief operations to other natural disasters, and because of the finance commission grant, the state governments were able to extend it, but the focus was on 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 relief in a kind of an assistance, with a minimalist approach. And the fundamental shift took place in 2005 when the Disaster Management Act was passed, and that act provided a statutory, right to relief, because it provided for minimum standards of relief and ex gratia relief, and minimum standards for food, for shelter, for water, sanitation, and for minimum standards for protection of the orphans, for the widows, etc. So these are the statutory provisions under Section 12 of the Disaster Management Act and also Section 19 of the Disaster Management Act. So we find that the recent amendment of the Disaster Management Act, which was passed by the Parliament, this Section 12, Section 19, as also Section 13 and Section 61. Section 13 says that remission and the rent, and the remission of the revenue remission, etc., and for providing for loan assistance, etc. So these provisions have been deleted. That means the right to relief, which was guaranteed under the Disaster Management Act, this right no longer exists. So this, and I find that there has not been any discussion on that, but this is a very fundamental change in that that right to relief, which was guaranteed by the act, that has been, that is no longer there. So I find that in Indian context there are challenges. First of all, in India we find that humanitarian relief is restricted only to disasters and only to specific types of disasters. 8 or 9 types of disasters which are included under this, under the norms of relief, and there are many other disasters which are not included. For example, heat wave, which is also a disaster, but this is not included as a disaster. So then we are very narrowly focusing it only to the disasters, and that to certain specific types of disasters. And we are not extending our humanitarian assistance to other types of humanitarian crisis situations like communal riots or civil disturbances, like, for example, where some special provisions have to be done as a special case, but these are not provided in the system. There is no systematic systems for providing this assistance, and much is left to the NGOs and others. So there are no organized, systematic government initiative for providing humanitarian assistance to the people in other disaster, other kind of situations. Then we find we have a very minimalist approach for disaster relief, because although there are standards, global standards for relief, like the sphere standards and others, which are very well defined, but in the standards of relief in Indian context are not well defined. Although the act provided, they prescribed that the NDMA will provide this, will come up with the guidelines on minimum standard of relief. And that guidelines were issued some in 2016, but very brief and very summary kind of a guidelines, which are not detailed compared to the sphere standards that we have. So that is another thing. Secondly, what are the humanitarian principles and standards? These principles are not nowhere defined. There is no humanitarian charter. Humanitarian principles are there, and defined in Indian context. So the humanitarian actors in India, whether in the government or in the non-government sector, they are not trained. They are not trained with the humanitarian values, humanitarian standards, or the processes to be followed. So you find that in the government sector, the relief is taken as a kind of as a duty, as a kind of a job, and where the government is providing it as a kind of a aid. So the give and take kind of a relationship, that we are not, we are not providing relief, we are not providing humanitarian assistance with empathy or with a sense of compassion or values for serving the people. That attitude of service, which is so important, that is altogether missing. And that's why you find that this humanitarian assistance, although the quantum of humanitarian the grant amount of the grant that is quite huge, and a lot of money is being spent in a very short period of time, and the satisfaction level among the among the victims are very, very low, because we have done a lot of studies in various parts of the country, and we found that much of the assistance is not reaching them to the last mile. Sometimes there are a huge amount of inefficiency, huge amount of corruption involved. So the humanitarian values, these are not properly understood. These are not properly being, there is no practiced, and there is no effort to develop the capacity of the people. So, and the humanitarian accountability framework is also not well defined. So, although in the government system there is some kind of financial accountability, but this actually, how much we are able to achieve and what kind of satisfaction are there, that is not being properly monitored, not only in the government sector but also in the non-government sector. So that is, there are a lot of things to be done for improving the humanitarian accountability. We find also there are no organized database on humanitarian needs and humanitarian gaps. So, what actually are the are the needs? Because we are giving the aid in a kind of a standard format, without taking into account the actual needs of the local people. So there is a lot of things to be done for for preparing the database. For example, we did a study some time back to find out that how much the government are spending on on specific items of assistances. For example, on shelter or on food or on water or on sanitation. This kind of disaggregated information on specific items of assistance that is being provided, and how much who is getting, and what is the, so that kind of monitoring, that kind of data, that the data sets are not at all available. So we know that what is the total amount is being spent, but we do not know that what actually is being spent on specific items of assistance. So I think the humanitarian data, that there is a lot of scope for improving our database, for our monitoring system, and for our evaluation system. So for this, I think there are certain agendas of action that
Josh, sir, we are sorry to interrupt you, but we are running short of time. So I would just like
so these
for
are
you
the
to.
5 or 6 agendas of action that I have, that I think that we must restore the right to relief that has been, and then we had we must have minimum standard of relief that is not properly defined, and we must develop an humanitarian charter involving all humanitarian actors, including civil society, private and corporate sector. And we must have training and capacity development activities for the humanitarian actors, create a database for humanitarian needs and the resources and the gaps, and then coordinating humanitarian action to ensure that no one is left behind. So that's all. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. I have a lot of takeaways, but just keeping time in mind, we'll move forward to our next speaker, Professor N. Vinod Chandramenon. Sir.
Thank you.
Sir, in between, if sir is,
I'm
your
sorry.
sir is taking time, can I ask one question?
Sure. Sure. Please go ahead.
To Dhar Chakravarti sir, you have been a part of the government. You have been the chair of the, I think, NIDM also.
Rajiv ji, shall we finish this? Otherwise, we'll run out of time. I mean, definitely we should have your question. Milan Saab, please go ahead.
Are you able to see my slides?
Not your slides, sir. We can see
no,
you.
sir. We can see you.
Okay, just a minute.
Rajiv ji will come back definitely.
Are you able to see the screen?
No, not yet.
I mean, we can see that you have started the screen sharing, but we cannot see the presentation.
Just a minute.
Also, kind request to keep it a little brief so that we have much time for our question and answers round. I'm so sorry, but we're actually running short of time here.
Yeah, I understand. I'm trying to see if I can actually share the screen. Just a minute. Okay. I would request the organizers to kindly share this.
Sure.
The team. I will just run through this presentation.
Maybe you can start.
Yes, sir. Please, you request you to start. Meanwhile, we will have. Thank you.
Or if you can actually share that from your side.
We can see your screen. I don't know who's sharing it.
We have shared your screen, sir. And
Okay,
whenever you have finished with the screen, you can say next. And we will change.
Yeah. We're basically looking at the question, reimagining accountability frameworks for India's disaster management system, and where do frontline managers stand? Next, please. So we have actually seen that there have been lots of initiatives from many platforms working on accountability frameworks in disaster management. We have LNAP in UK, which has been looking at major sets of publications from various organizations working in the field of humanitarian assistance. And so they have a large collection. And there's also from the Disaster and Emergency Committee of UK, where Mihir Bhai is also one of the active leaders, trying to really bring in this question of accountability. There have also been a framework from the DEC accountability framework, and then there's also the core humanitarian standards on quality and accountability, and there is also the CHS standard 1 to standard 9, and many others, including the sphere standards, and now the CHS is now the active standard. But there is also several other international publications working on this area in terms of from various platforms like People in Aid and so on. Next slide, please. So there are many organizations which are actively participating in this, including the steering committee of the agencies working in humanitarian action, and then CHS Alliance and IFRC, and many UN agencies, including UNICEF, UN OCHA, UNDRR, and UN Women, UNFPA, and so on. And we also have networks like the ADRRN, the Asian Disaster Risk Reduction Network, and many other platforms like GNDR and others who are also trying to bring in these. Next slide, please. Now, in terms of this, one of the most important development was this, the UN agencies coming together to look at the accountability to affected populations, looking at leadership and governance, transparency, feedback and complaints, participation, and design, monitoring, and evaluation. This has been one initiative which was also implemented in some of the disasters in India, including the 2018 floods in Kerala by the UNICEF. Next slide, please. So in terms of the CHS, the core humanitarian standard and quality and accountability, there are these 9 standards which I feel are very relevant, but at the same time we find the errors in commission and omission and neglect of these various standards, which are actually seen in many of the disasters in many parts of the country, and also in many countries around the world, especially in conflicts and complex humanitarian emergencies, conflicts, and also the kind of pressures which we are seeing when there are violent attacks and the violation of human rights, as what we have seen in Gaza Strip and also in Ukraine. Next slide, please. So in terms of the accountability of frontline humanitarian workers, we have many standards, many frameworks which have been prepared by agencies like Credibility Alliance in India, People in Aid globally, GuideStar, which is also getting implemented in India now, and the transition from Kapat to Darpan. Kapat was actually a platform which was actually supporting civil society organizations in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. And then we have the Niti Aayog and the Planning Commission, the Niti Aayog coming up with Darpan. And we have the Sphere India initiative from 2003 onwards, where many of the humanitarian actors have been very actively participating. And we have WANI, the Voluntary Associations Network of India, then PRIA and COVA. And we also have Meherbai's leadership, the South Asia Disasters.net, the GNDR, the Asia Disaster Risk Reduction Network, and the DMAC 2005 and the National Disaster Management Policy 2009, and the Disaster Management Amendment Act 2025, and the accountability of humanitarian assistance organizations and frontline workers. This remains a question mark. Next slide. Okay, I would like to basically also repeat what Rajiv ji mentioned about the pandemic. The COVID pandemic, actually, we had lost a large number of people, the frontline workers, and also the first responders, including the people from the medical profession, doctors, Anganwadi workers, ASHA workers, and many others. We also had seen the loss of many humanitarian assistance workers in the front lines. In fact, we have personally come across the loss of lives of several civil society actors, during the COVID. They were infected, they were in the hospital, they were also in ventilators and ICUs, and then many of them actually also lost their lives. And the attempt was to also look at insurance cover for those people in the humanitarian assistance sector. But as you all know, the humanitarian assistance sector and the civil society organizations in general are going through a lot of challenges in terms of funding, and there are many issues which they are facing. I would like to just conclude by mentioning that whether it was in conflicts, whether it was actually also the loss of humanitarian assistance workers from the UN, or the MSF, the Medicine Sans Frontiers, and many other organizations which were actually having their workers in the line of conflict and also who have lost their lives, there is a need to have some framework, policies, and guidelines. And to conclude, I would also like to just mention a very important point which was brought out by Mr. Dar Chakravarti on the deletion of the sections 12 and 19 on the minimum standards of relief in the amendment in 2025 in the Disaster Management Act, Amendment Act 2025. This is a matter of concern, and I feel also that there were 2 references on 2 slides to natural disasters in Mr. Dar Chakravarti's presentation. The UNDRR has been running a campaign saying no natural disasters. Natural hazards are there, which become disasters, but then there are no natural disasters. Disasters are happening because of the human interventions with nature, human interference with nature. That I would like to just conclude and point out that we would need to delete the references to natural disasters from our dialogue. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. I'm so sorry that we cut you short. We had some time management issue here. But let's go forward with Q&A. Everyone?
I think Rajiv ji had a question. Let's start with that first, and then if I request you.
Sir, thank you. My question to Dhar Chakravarti, sir, because I have closely watched his tenure as a chairman, vice, head of the NIDM, and he has been to government offices all along. And he's also been a very daring officer in his own time, known way in NIDM. Often needs to defy the government orders and do such things which is more people's oriented. So, in that context, I wanted to ask whether ever you have discussed this issue of humanitarian policy making, which goes across the states and more release oriented, more humanitarian empathy bringing to the Disaster Management Act and all that. Because I know you are in one thick and thin of business now in different positions. So wanted to hear some insight about if you can have you can share with somebody with all of this.
We always say that there is a paradigm shift from relief to, uh, post-disaster relief and rehabilitation to pre-disaster mitigation and all. But having said this, I still believe that in the post-disaster relief, there are a lot of things to be done because this is a subject which we have ignored. Because this, if you look at it, this our almost 80% of whatever allocations are there, they are spending on relief. But the satisfaction level of on relief, it is very very low. Because the persons who are giving the relief, the humanitarian actors, the actors in the government or outside the government in the NGO sector and etc. Those who are actually doing the relief, they are they are not properly trained. They are not trained. I have seen these humanitarian workers working in other countries. I think, and I found they have, their fundamentals are far strong. Here, you take it as a job. We come for some specific period for 2, 3, 4 years, and then we do it. We do not have uh, the proper orientation into the humanitarian principles or values or how we approach the victims, and so there is a lot to be done. In fact, there is a lot to be done for reforming the entire relief sector. You know, and we are still following basically the relief manuals, which are still fundamentally oriented towards this famine code. And I was very appalled to see that some of the relief manuals of some of these states which are still largely copied from this famine code. This is a colonial famine code. So the entire sector need to be properly reformed. We must have proper humanitarian standards. They are a very well laid down standards, global standards. We have not really tried to adapt it in our Indian conditions. So and now, in fact, the NDMA, they were supposed to lay down the guidelines. They have done so many guidelines, 20, 25, 2 dozen guidelines, and very comprehensive guidelines in other sector. But on humanitarian minimum standards relief, their guidelines are very sketchy, just 15 or 16 pages, and that too was issued somewhere in 2016. And now that the section is also removed, there is section 12 and section 19 of the Disaster Management Act is deleted, and there has been no discussion on that. So the transition from the right-based approach to relief, that was introduced by the Disaster Management Act, and it is really very shocking that this has not been discussed. So I think our primary concern should be that we must re-establish the right to relief, develop certain standards on that, establish proper humanitarian principles, the common humanitarian principles which should bind both the government and non-government sector, and also it will take up a program for training the humanitarian actors, where the humanitarian values and principles should be ingrained into the system, which is missing altogether.
Thank you so much, sir. Do we have any questions in the audience? Please do raise your hands, or you can write on the chat box.
I think let's move on. Otherwise, we'll be out of time.
Yes, but maybe I can ask one quick question, if that's doable, very quickly. I mean, for example, if we put accountability first into practice, I just want to ask what would change on ground for, say, community workers in the next 3 months?
Who is this question to, please?
Any of the three speakers, maybe? Or maybe what are the three concrete things you would recommend for state authorities in India to strengthen accountability for frontline workers? Like that would be my quick question.
Yeah, maybe all three panel members, they have such good experience, both of implementation, but also thinking about the system for such a long time. So if you can request, you can start with Menon sir first, and then Dar Saab, and then Rajiv ji. Menon sir, if you could start.
May I respond to that question by mentioning that political will is very important for strengthening risk governance in our country.
Exactly.
And political will essentially means that we need to engage with the ministers in charge, whether it is the Home Minister, the Minister of State in the Home Ministry, and also the Revenue and Disaster Management Ministers in the states, the Vice Chairman of the State Disaster Management Authorities, and others, to influence the thinking through advocacy, very strong advocacy with the chief ministers, who are also chairing the state disaster management authorities. So that is my first point, is the political will, strengthening the political will. And second is also creating awareness among the administrators. The administrators have a window of maybe 2 to 3 years while they're serving as the relief commissioners and the principal secretary disaster management in the revenue department. And so if they are actually aware of the need to empower the field workers, the government officials at the block level, the revenue, the taluka level, and tahsildars and others, that will actually have a huge impact. And the third point, which I would like to also mention, is that the interagency groups of the NGOs at the state levels and the district levels need to be far more empowered to ensure that they are able to advocate with the state disaster management authorities and the district disaster management authorities. In most states, the DDMAs and the SDMAs are not really active. And so we need to really make them active, because they are mandated to protect lives and also protect livelihoods. Save lives and protect livelihoods. And we see the kind of disasters which are happening now. Lives are lost because of acts of commission and omission by government officers and elected representatives, which should be prevented and restricted and reduced. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. Any other comments, or we move forward with our concluding remarks from Mr. Mihibut?
I think one ground level change can happen just by introducing one strong letter by the Department of Home Affairs. Will ensure that the safety and security of the humanitarian or community workers, those who are engaged in either from the government or from the NGOs, will be ensured by establishing the security protocols or the safety protocols. That one letter can ensure so many lives across the country. So within 3 months, it is doable. It may not be perfect, but it is doable. And as far as awareness is concerned, they are aware. I mean, Indian bureaucrats and people are so seasoned. They can do a mammoth election in the country years after years, which is probably largest democratic size ever in any part of the world. They know everything. What they want is just a nudge. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. We go ahead with our concluding remarks. And we ahead.
So now I have a great honor and pride both to be with Vinod Saab, you, and Dhar Saab, your years of experience in shaping the modern relief, rehabilitation, humanitarian system in India for last 30 years. We've benefited from that, and that's very, very fortunate for me personally, but all of us. So thank you for offering that in such a short and somewhat truncated time schedule. But we did want to move ahead. And Rajiv ji, you also especially bringing not only your own experience, but experience of the local small organizations all across the country. Not even NGO, even smaller than local organizations that are member of your various activities. So thank you for that. I also want to congratulate the distinguished colleagues who are in the audience and the partners and friends. Partners, I mean, of course, HAI and Radar, who've also been part of organizing this. As India accelerates towards Viksit Bharat 2047, it is increasingly clear that economic growth alone will not define our success. The true measure of progress will be how we protect lives, livelihoods, dignity, and justice, especially in the moments and in between the two moments of crisis. This call for nothing less than a humanitarian reset for India's humanitarian system, and one that is, as we discussed, prompt, inclusive, accountable, and rooted in lived experience of India itself, millions of Indians itself. India today faces compounding risks: climate extremes, heat waves, as you have pointed out, floods, migration, urban vulnerability, and widening inequalities. Humanitarian response can no longer be episodic or reactive, that we all agree, and we are all working towards making it remove these two challenges. It must become an integral part of India's development pathway, designed not only to save lives, but to accelerate resilience and inclusive growth. What do we mean by humanitarian reset? And Dhar Sahib, you really put that question in our mind to rethink about it. A humanitarian reset begins with prompt and dignified relief. Delays in payment and assistance erode trust and deepen vulnerability. Streamlined, transparent, and rapid humanitarian payment must become the norm, not the exception. It is possible with the new technology that we have at our disposal to transfer large amount of money to large number of people immediately after relief. And how do we actually make it work? Jasai, from HAI experience, second thing that you have pointed out is relief must go beyond food and cash alone. People require flexibility, context-specific support that protects dignity, safety, livelihoods, and more importantly, well-being. Relief must respond to real needs, not administrative convenience in terms of delivery. And that's something we all aim to achieve as soon as possible. Menon Saab, with your own experience, but I gather also from Radar experience, third thing that you have pointed out is the reset requires us to place women at the center of humanitarian action. Even if we look at something else that you are heading, Swayam Shikshan Prayog, one of the pioneer work that has been done about women in disasters since Latur days, that not only as recipients, but women as leaders of relief and reset. How do we ensure that? Directing relief to and through women strengthens accountability, improves outcomes we have seen in our own work, and addresses protection, risk, including violence and exclusion that happens, the gender-based violence that happens. So that is a very important point, Menon Saab, you have put on the table for us to take further. Menon Saab, also the fourth point that you have said in the light of SDMAs and the political will that you just mentioned, relief must transition seamlessly into early recovery and green economic growth. Humanitarian assistance should not be treated as an investment, one that supports climate resilient livelihoods, small businesses, and sustainable local economies. Unless relief becomes an investment and from that point of view, not necessarily at all generating profit for those who have invested, but generating profit, social profit, prosperity, where the investment has taken place. That's something is very important. And finally, humanitarian action must be inclusive by design, welcoming participation from national actors, civil society organizations, local institutions, and even diaspora and large and very fast expanding NRI communities. Their contribution to humanitarian sector in terms of money and setting the agenda is becoming increasingly noticeable through transparent and accountable mechanisms. So what I'd like to say is that accountability begins at the front line, not in the accounts book or accountability report, as Tahir Bhai, member of Accountability Now, is here and would tell us. As we reflect on accountability, today's discussion reminds us to a simple but often ignored truth. Accountability in humanitarian action must begin with people, especially with those on the front line. As Sahib, you have said, officials, community leaders, panchayat leaders, women leaders, cooperative leaders who are at the front line where relief is being actually implemented. Too often, accountability is understood as reporting upward to donors, to authorities, to headquarters, Delhi, Geneva, New York. And that's important, of course. But yet, real accountability flows downward and outward towards frontline workers, community volunteers, local officials, and most importantly, affected people, as Dar Sahib, you have pointed out in your presentation. The frontline humanitarian workers are not merely implementers, as Sudhanshu Bhai has been telling us for such a long time. They are right holders that safety, fair compensation, mental well-being, insurance protection, legal protection are not secondary concerns of humanitarian action. They are essential and primary ethical, effective humanitarian concerns. As Menon Sahib, you have pointed out by saying that IAG, interagency groups, have a role to play. So this doesn't have to start at Delhi level. It has to start at a state level with interagency groups and SDMAs to make that this happens. If a humanitarian system places people at risk, but fails to protect those who respond first and stay longest, then we must question not only our practices, but our principles. That is what we have found in our AIDMI work. From principles to practice, how do we implement this reset? That is what we have explored here today. The humanitarian reset must now move decisively from ideas to action, at least in India, to shape the humanitarian system worldwide. And let us not underestimate the capacity of India to shape the global humanitarian system if India and Indians, if we decide to do so. And how do we do that? First, India must establish a dedicated humanitarian response fund designed for flexibility, speed, and transparency. If we can have a large surplus mitigation fund in such a short time with such difficulty, I'm sure we can have a humanitarian response fund created, dedicated specifically for humanitarian response purpose. There are other funds that Dar Sahib is aware, Menon Sahib is aware. What I am suggesting is, based on the discussion, that we pool all of that together, not necessarily in one account, but we pool it together so that they work as a network of funds useful for different purposes, different locations, for different communities and different types of disasters. Such a fund would enable prompt relief while reducing bureaucratic delays. May this be on the Finance Commission's deliberations, whoever is participating in that. That is something with the help of this particular discussion and further could be taken. Second, inclusive relief frameworks must prioritize women, children, informal workers, migrants, small businesses, marginalized communities, and minorities, ensuring accessibility, awareness, and participation, as REDAR is demanding again and again through its training, but far beyond training on the ground, through the members and through the people it is training. Third, we must actively support women-led relief initiative, investing in leadership, training, and local institutions that already serve as first responders, as we have found in our work, and as Dr. Hannah recently and RHPW 2025 very clearly demonstrated with the panel members, that that is something which works better, faster, and for a longer time. And this work is also being supported by state authorities and by UNICEF. I understand the report is ready and will be shared and used widely at various levels. Fourth, humanitarian partnerships must explicitly support green recovery and climate resilience, particularly in the face of recurring heat waves and climate stress. Something Sphere India has now, both locally and Sphere globally, has been propagating to have some minimum standards. Equally important, the Charter for Environment and Climate also clearly shows that how this can be done. India doesn't have to copy it. India has to find ways to make sure that its own way of working, its own way of providing relief becomes far more green than it is now. In fact, its own relief becomes a transformative relief so that after each relief, we have the communities not have been compensated, but actually are part of the green economy of India, Bharat 2047. And fifth, protect and insurance for local officials and frontline workers must be institutionalized. If we can have insurance for disaster affected people, why can't we have insurance for the officials and frontline workers, which should be institutionalized, embedded in budgets, embedded in SOPs and national systems, not left to goodwill or project-based arrangements in all SDMS of India. This is what something I think very important. This is possible without any budget, without any new changes, without any structures. It just needs a decision to integrate what exists to make it work. So the way ahead is, allow me to highlight the priorities in the end. One is accountability must be institutionalized as duty of care, including safety protocols, insurance, mental health support, fair wages, and grievances redressal mechanisms. Two, humanitarian system must guarantee safe and retaliation-free spaces supported by whistleblowers, practitioners, and independent third-party oversight. Three, we must shift power to local and frontline actors, recognizing local leadership, not rhetorically, but structurally. And we are not doing this as a favor. Most of disaster response invariably always is by local actors. We just have to recognize and make sure that they receive what support they need from those who are not local. Four, accountability frameworks must respond to emerging and compounding risk, especially climate change and extreme heat, which are no longer exceptional events, but recurring humanitarian emergencies every year, necessarily going to increase whatever we try to do, except the mitigation measures that we take. And five, the 10 reset questions on accountability must live beyond today's discussions, shaping organizational reviews, training programs, donor dialogues, and national and subnational policy processes. So I would like to request both AIDMI, everybody here who is interested, Sushma-ji, you especially, without asking you, that let the answer to these 10 questions be addressed based on the discussion and excellent presentation that we have here, and submit that to the national authorities and state authorities to help them think through their own practical actions. So let me conclude with this reflection. And that is that a humanitarian system that does not protect its own people cannot claim to protect affected communities. It is unjust, unequal, and inhuman. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. While there is a lot to discuss, I believe that you very diligently summarized on how to shape humanitarian actions for India and for the world. Thank you so much to all our speakers, participants for a rich and rounded discussion today. Maybe have more in the future. If there's one message we are living with, it is that accountability has to be experienced first by frontline and community workers in safety, dignity, fair compensation, trusted grievance mechanisms, innovation, legal and digital protection, climate resilience, and financing that is actually accessible locally. I'm very thankful to our speakers, to Mr. Rajiv Kumar Jha for framing this through rights and practical mechanisms, to Dr. P.G. Dar Chakrabarti for calling for a deeper Humanitarian research that is value-based and locally led, and to Professor N. Vinod Chandra Menon for grounding accountability in standards and institutional framework, and to Mr. Mihir Bhatt for sharpening the way ahead through his insights. As next steps, AIDMI will compile and share a final report from this panel with all the participants, capturing key takeaways, recommendations, and suggested actions that emerged today, and also answering the 10 questions that Mihir sir mentioned. And then we'll share it with you. Thank you so much once again for being here. And we'll continue this discussion every day as part of our lives and also as part of a community itself as we meet next time. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you, and Happy New Year to everybody.
Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Namaste.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.